You ever have one of those moments where you just sit back and think, did that really just happen? That was me, staring out my car window at a fully built neighborhood, on my land. See, I've never been the kind of guy who rushes into things. I like to take my time, observe, and plan ahead. And when I inherited this land from my grandfather, I did exactly that. I didn't rush to sell it, didn't build on it, didn't even fence it off. I just watched. And sure enough, the vultures started circling. The HOA from the neighborhood next door sent me offers, letters, and even tried a little intimidation. This land would be so much more valuable with houses on it. Wouldn't it be easier to just sell? If you don't act now, you might lose out. I never responded, because while they saw an empty piece of land, I saw an opportunity. And then one day they made a huge mistake. The first time I saw the houses, I thought maybe I was in the wrong place. I had driven past my land for years, always the same view, open fields, maybe a few tire tracks from deer or some stray dirt bikers. But now there were rows of houses, sidewalks, streetlights. People were living there. I took a deep breath, pulled over, and checked my GPS. No mistake. This was still my land. I could have lost my mind right then. Could have stormed into the HOA's office, yelling, demanding answers. But I didn't. Instead, I smiled, because I realized something they didn't. They had built 96 homes on land they didn't own, and they had no idea yet. See, here's the thing about me. I don't get mad. I get prepared. I had a feeling something like this might happen. The HOA had been sniffing around for years, and I knew the moment they thought they could get away with something, they would. So I had done my homework. I had every legal document proving ownership locked and loaded. I had boundary surveys, land deeds, zoning paperwork, all airtight, all bulletproof. And now, all I had to do was wait. I watched as families moved in, as the HOA threw fancy little meetings boasting about their seamless expansion. I even attended one, sitting quietly in the back as their smug president, a guy named Richard, patted himself on the back for how well everything had gone. Oh, Richard, you have no idea. When the time was right, I sent one letter, a simple, polite letter, certified, of course, stating that they were trespassing on private property, that they had 30 days to remove all structures. And then I waited for the explosion. At first, nothing. Then, a hesitant email from Richard himself. There seems to be some confusion about ownership. We'd be happy to discuss this in person. Confusion? Oh, buddy, you're about to be very clear on the situation. I agreed to meet, but not alone. I brought my lawyer. Richard, thinking this was just a minor paperwork issue, brought his lawyers too. We sat down in a fancy conference room, and I let them talk first. They danced around words like misunderstanding and good faith efforts. They even suggested maybe there had been a clerical error. Then I pulled out my documents, laid everything out one by one, showed them every single piece of legal proof that this land belonged to me. The moment Richard's lawyer flipped through the last page, I saw it. The color drained from his face. His fingers twitched. His eyes darted to Richard. Oh, yeah, they knew. At this point, the room was dead silent. You could hear the air conditioning humming. Finally, Richard cleared his throat. Well, there must be some way to resolve this, he said, forcing a smile. I nodded. Of course, but it's going to cost you. See, here's what made the situation even worse for the HOA. They had already sold homes. Families had moved in. The homeowners had no idea their houses weren't on legally owned land. If the HOA didn't fix this, they'd be looking at lawsuits from every direction. And their options? Not great. They could try to fight it in court and lose, which could mean demolishing 96 homes. Or they could buy the land at my price. I slid a piece of paper across the table. On it, a very large number. Richard's face turned red. This is outrageous, he snapped. I leaned back, folded my arms, and smiled. No, Richard, this is business. They tried everything, negotiating, stalling, even threatening legal action. But their lawyers already knew the truth. They had no case. A few weeks later, the HOA cut me a check. And when that money hit my account, let's just say I took a very nice vacation. The aftermath, the HOA, now millions of dollars poorer, had to explain themselves to the homeowners. People were furious. Some wanted to sue. Some moved out. And Richard? He resigned a few months later, citing personal reasons. As for me, I walked away wealthy, with a grin on my face and a story I'd be telling for the rest of my life. Because in the end, this wasn't just about money. It was about patience, about knowing when to strike, about watching the greedy walk right into their own trap. And man, it was beautiful. You ever see a man try to act like he's still in control when everything is slipping through his fingers? That was Richard. After our little meeting where I dropped a bombshell that the land and the entire 96-home neighborhood belonged to me, he must have gone into full panic mode. Because the next thing I knew, I got a legal letter from their attorneys. And let me tell you, it was the most desperate, weak, laughable attempt at a defense I had ever seen. They actually tried to argue adverse possession, claiming that since they had developed the land, they now had a legal right to it. I kid you not, I read that letter while drinking my morning coffee and almost spit out laughing. See, adverse possession doesn't work when you steal land in broad daylight. The owner, me, never agreed to anything. You just build on it without asking. So I did what any sane person would do. I ignored their bluff and let them sweat. But Richard, he wasn't done embarrassing himself. He called a town meeting. Not just any town meeting. He invited homeowners, the HOA board, even the local news. He was trying to flip the script, make me the villain. Oh, Richard, this is going to be fun. I showed up to that town meeting early, grabbed a seat right in the front row. Richard, still holding on to his fantasy of being in charge, stood at the podium, pretending to be calm. But his hands were shaking, just a little. Folks, he started, we are facing an unprecedented attack on our community. I bit my tongue to stop from laughing. This man, he gestured toward me, wants to take our homes away. He wants to destroy what we built together. Murmurs of concern rippled through the crowd. Some people looked at me, skeptical. Others nodded at Richard's words. That's when I stood up, and, in the calmest voice possible, I said, let's not make this a debate. Let's look at the facts. Then I walked up to the front, reached into my bag, and pulled out a giant land survey map. I unrolled it across a table so everyone could see. And, clear as day, the official land boundaries showed that every single one of their homes was built on land I still owned. Silence. Then, panic. Wait, does this mean we don't even own our own land? What about our mortgages? Is my house illegal? Homeowners were furious. Some turned to Richard, demanding answers. Others just looked sick, realizing they had been duped. Richard tried to salvage it. There has to be a misunderstanding, he sputtered. I just shook my head and said, there's no misunderstanding, Richard. You knew this land wasn't yours. You just thought you wouldn't get caught. And just like that, the crowd turned on him. That night, Richard called me. His voice was different. Gone was the arrogance. Now he sounded small. Look, we don't have to do this publicly, he started. Maybe we can find another arrangement? I leaned back in my chair, smirking. Go on, I said. And, oh, did he go on? He tried every trick in the book. Bribery, begging, guilt-tripping, talking about preserving the integrity of the community. I let him talk, let him think he had a chance. And then, when he finally ran out of words, I said, Richard, I don't think you understand. This isn't about negotiation anymore. This is about consequences. Silence. Then, in the weakest voice I'd ever heard from him, he asked, what do you want? I smiled. Oh, you'll find out soon. And then I hung up. Now it was time to put the nail in the coffin. While Richard was scrambling, trying to do damage control, I had my lawyers draw up a lawsuit. And it wasn't just for money. I demanded heavy checkmark, full compensation for my land, at my price. Heavy checkmark, all legal fees covered. Heavy checkmark, Richard's resignation. Heavy checkmark, the HOA that dissolved or every board member would be personally sued. The moment that lawsuit hit, all hell broke loose. Homeowners who had been lied to started suing the HOA themselves. The local news picked up the story, calling it the HOA's biggest blunder ever. And Richard? Well, he disappeared. One day, he was still fighting. The next, he had resigned for personal reasons. But we all knew what really happened. He ran. With their leader gone, the HOA collapsed. And in the end, they came crawling back to me, begging for a settlement. You ever get that feeling of absolute satisfaction? The kind where you don't even feel the need to gloat, because reality already did it for you? That's how I felt when I watched the HOA dissolve. They paid me every cent I demanded. I walked away millions of dollars richer. And Richard? Well, rumor has it he moved out of state. Can't say I blame him. As for the homeowners, they overthrew what was left of the HOA and created a simple neighborhood association. No stupid rules, no outrageous fees, and most importantly, no Richard. It was poetic justice. They thought they could steal from me. Instead, they walked straight into their own trap. And I walked away, laughing all the way to the bank. You know that feeling after a storm passes? The sky clears, the wind settles, but everything around you still feels off. That's exactly what the neighborhood felt like after the lawsuit ended. Like the storm was gone, but the damage was still there. People weren't celebrating. There were no victory parades. Just whispers. Some families moved out immediately. I think they were too embarrassed to stay. Imagine finding out you spent your life, savings on a home, that was never legally yours to begin with. That kind of shame, it sticks to you. Others stayed, but you could see it on their faces, the weight of betrayal. And then there were the banks. See, most of these people didn't own their homes outright. They had mortgages. And now that the land ownership was a mess, the bank saw a problem. A big one. People started getting letters, foreclosure notices. I remember seeing an older couple standing on their front lawn one morning. The wife holding a piece of paper, tears in her eyes. Her husband just stood there, staring at the ground, like his whole world had crumbled. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. I had won. But at what cost? I went home that night and sat at my desk, staring at the legal papers that had made me a multimillionaire. I should have been ecstatic. This was the kind of win people dream about. But all I could think about was that old couple and the families who had no idea they were walking into a scam. That's when I made a decision no one saw coming. I took a huge chunk of the money I won and bought back the land. Yep, the same land that Richard and his HOA stole from me. I bought it out from under the banks before they could foreclose on the homeowners. And then I called a meeting. Not a fancy, formal HOA-style meeting. Just a simple gathering in the park. I laid it out straight. I own this land now, but I don't want to be the bad guy here. So, if you want to stay, I'll sell it to you at a fair price. No hidden fees. No nonsense. Just a clean slate. People were stunned. One guy straight up asked, "What's the catch?" There wasn't one. I wasn't Richard. I wasn't here to bleed them dry. I just wanted justice. And sometimes justice is about winning. It's about making things right. It didn't happen overnight, but something beautiful started taking shape. Without the HOA breathing down their necks, the neighborhood started to feel like, well, an actual neighborhood. No more stupid rules. No more $500 fines for having the wrong shade of blue on your front door. No more fear of some power-hungry board controlling every detail of people's lives. People actually started talking to each other. A guy named Dave, who had lived there for years, came up to me one day and said, "You know, I never even knew half my neighbors before this. Now, we actually help each other out." That's when I knew I hadn't just won a legal battle. I had built something better. Now, you're probably wondering, what happened to Richard? Oh, don't worry. The universe took care of him. About a year later, I got an email from an old neighbor. Subject line, "Look who finally got what he deserved." It was a news article. Richard had been arrested. Turns out, this little land-stealing stunt wasn't his first rodeo. He had been pulling similar scams in other places, messing with contracts, manipulating legal loopholes, destroying people's lives. But this time, someone looked up his history. My lawsuit, the HOA collapse, the scandal, and the second he tried pulling his tricks again, boom, handcuffs. I clicked on the article, scrolled down, and there it was, a mugshot. Richard didn't look like the smug, arrogant HOA president anymore. He looked defeated. No fancy suit, no fake confidence. Just a guy who had finally run out of lies. I stared at the photo for a while. Then I leaned back, closed my laptop, and just smiled. Poetic justice. Looking back, I realized something. This whole thing, it wasn't just about winning. It was about exposing the truth. It was about showing that greedy people always fall, no matter how powerful they think they are. It was about proving that doing the right thing is more powerful than revenge. And most of all, it was about reminding people that they deserve better. No one should control you just because they wear a fancy title. No one should profit off your hard work while giving you nothing in return. And no one, N-O-1, should get away with stealing what's yours. So, to all the Richard types out there, maybe don't mess with the wrong guy, because you never know when the trap has already been set.